of the bad ideas you went through, and why did you decide they were bad ideas?
A bunch of bad ideas. I think it's important to have a lot of bad ideas to have a few good ones. And everybody was like, oh, this is really cool, but I can't think of anything right now, but I'll let you know, or maybe somebody else would. And I was like, I actually know your workflow because I worked with you for 2 or 3 years. That's a funny way to phrase it.
That's my first question, which is always the question I ask everybody is, if you were a superhero, in this case, you are a superhero in this example, what is your origin story? How did we get here?
That's a funny way to phrase it. Let's see. So I guess starting from the beginning, I'm originally from the East Coast, Northern Virginia, right outside DC. I went to school at University of Illinois to study computer science, where I was there for 4 years. And then I moved out to the Bay Area because I really wanted to work in the tech industry and in startups specifically. And so I started out at this tiny company called Biome. I was the first employee. They were basically building this microbiome testing kit for everyday consumers to measure the health of their gut and provide recommendations on what foods and vitamins and stuff they could take to improve their gut health. And so I was there for about a year, and then I ended up moving to Reddit, where I worked initially as an engineer for about 2 years, and then switched into product management, mostly working on growth and user onboarding. And yeah, I was there for about 4 years total at Reddit, and I left my job at the beginning of 2021, so kind of a year after COVID started. And I just really wanted to start my own company. Like I said, that's kind of why I moved out to the Bay Area and into the tech industry. And I felt like I had learned so much in those 4 or 5 years of working that I wanted to give it a shot myself at this point. And so it took me about a year, of working on different things, going through tons of bad ideas, like building prototypes, talking to people, validating, invalidating stuff, where I eventually started to get more and more into the crypto space through some friends I was talking to, just some research I was doing purely to even just understand the space. I was like, can I find something that's interesting? Can I learn about what's going on in this industry? Because even if I don't do a startup or work here at all, everyone's talking about it all the time. So I want to have my own opinions. And I got connected to some people that were working on a startup. And so that got me even more into the space. Although I ended up not joining them, it helped me identify this problem that felt really personal to a lot of the stuff that I've been working on Reddit, which was how hard it is to actually get into the crypto, to set up your own crypto wallet and try out your first crypto app and all those sorts of things. And so that's what led to me starting Wally, where the goal is that we make it really easy for people to just sign up for a crypto wallet with an email address. And so yeah, I guess it's a long-winded way of saying, I kind of worked at a really tiny startup, slightly bigger startup at Reddit, was lucky to experience a bunch of successes and learnings and really amazing team members there. And then that gave me the confidence to jump into my own thing.
What were some of the bad ideas you went through, and why did you decide they were bad ideas?
A bunch of bad ideas. I think it's important to have a lot of bad ideas to have a few good ones. So one idea was it was kind of like a sort of competitor to Google Docs in a sense. I felt like we spent a lot of time in Google Docs, but it doesn't really feel like it was designed for like the modern workplace. Like the most simple example of that, I think, is that when you open up a new Google Sheet, it's still, I think to this day, defaults to a printed piece of paper, like as if you're going to print it out. And I can't even remember the last time I printed out a document that started out on Google Docs. I think there's almost an implication that if you're going to print it out, like why would you be creating it in Google Docs? So that was like the basis. I mean, one of the most basic things, but other things in terms of like how you collaborate through the document, in terms of like interactive modules, like the ability to auto update and auto pull in information from other sources, things like that. And so anyways, I tried this idea where I built this whole like kind of programmatic document. I mean, you could think of it now. I think Coda is very similar to that. I mean, Notion obviously has some elements, but I just never really liked Notion. But anyways, I tried to build it and show it to some folks. And the idea was that it would fit into certain workflows. And I went to my old coworkers who had workflows where I thought this would be a really perfect tool for them. And I was like, hey, do you get the tool? Do you see anything in your current daily workflow where you might want to use this? And everybody was like, oh, this is really cool, but I can't think of anything right now, but I'll let you know, or maybe somebody else would. And I was like, I actually know your workflow because I worked with you for 2 or 3 years. And so the fact that it's not really connecting with you makes me feel like there's something that I'm not doing properly here. And then, I mean, for that idea too, there was tons of other things. Like you would basically have to write like billions of integrations to make it work the way that people expected and stuff. So I just like kind of looked at that and was like, I'm not sure that it's the right idea. Another idea was that I'd met a friend who was trying to be sort of an Instagram influencer, but I wouldn't say influencer in the way a lot of people think of it. Like she was basically a coach and she was using Instagram to market herself and provide advice and then connect with folks that would eventually sign up for one of her classes or a session or something like that. And I realized that she did a lot of her kind of customer relations through Instagram. And so I had this idea for a Chrome extension that would sit on top of Instagram and help her manage those things like as a CRM. And I built it out and gave it to her. And I was like, hey, do you want to install this and play around with it and give me some feedback? And I did that with 2 or 3 people. And for whatever reason, I just like, they weren't even excited to, like, they didn't install it after like a week or two, even with me bugging them. And so I was like, okay, if these 2 people that I kind of built this bespoke tool for aren't even installing it right away, then maybe that's not the right pain point for them. That's super urgent. So I'd say those were 2 of the bad ideas that I went through.
Your experience at Reddit, what did you work on that deeply informed the product that you're working today? How were you able to like draw a straight line from what you worked on Reddit to what you're working on today?
The biggest thing was how much time we focused on improving the onboarding flow at Reddit. I think that was like a really critical piece that I learned a ton from that in terms of just like how do you build consumer products specifically, but like any product in general is how critical the onboarding flow is. And so that's where like I looked at what crypto apps were doing currently, and let alone like having a poor onboarding flow, they were forcing people to actually go to a totally different product and get onboarded there and only then come back to their product. And like, I mean, that other product, meaning the wallet that they'd have to set up like MetaMask or something like that. And so, yeah, I think that's where I saw like every single win that we had in onboarding flow was like, how do you reduce steps? How do you make the user think less? How do you make the process simpler? How do you infer the right things about them? And in crypto, we just weren't, nobody was doing really any of that. They were trying to add pretty much as many barriers as possible. So that's definitely, I think, where a lot of those learnings came from and that line towards what I'm working on now.
But was there like a Eureka moment where you gave this to somebody and they were like, I love this, you should build this?
Like even the first idea I started out with in crypto was slightly different than this. I was actually pitching people on this kind of API or developer tooling for building NFT based products. And actually only one small piece of that pitch was that we'll help the user set up their wallet. And when I talked to people, they were like, the rest of this isn't that interesting, but like the wallet, if you actually built that, I would use it right away. And it wasn't just that. I mean, that was one piece which encouraged me to like re-architect the pitch around how the wallet was the most important thing. And some of the other stuff was more secondary. But the fact that the people I was talking to, they were like, we're calling this company and trying to see if they can solve this problem for us, but they don't have the right solution. We're calling this company. And so I was like, wow, they're like literally calling companies trying to find the answer to this and nobody has it. And so that level of like people are searching for this was, I think, a really key part of it for me.
Now that you have a product and you're getting it into the hands of consumers, how are you validating and iterating and just improving on your process?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into that. I think the most critical part of that as a startup, I think, is to just be really close to the customer so that you actually have that like kind of casual relationship where they can tell you things, you can ask them for feedback as you learn things. So we basically create a Slack channel or a Telegram group or some sort of chat, like, and specifically chat, not even like email or something like that, something that feels super fast and instant with every one of our early customers so that if they have any sort of trouble or anything, they feel like they can just chat us and we can either respond to them or prioritize a fix or just discuss it with them. And so I think that's probably the highest leverage thing in the early stages when you don't have that many different conversations to manage. And I think that can actually last quite a bit longer than people think. I forget what startup it was, but I think I remember hearing that they were doing that almost up till their first 100 customers. So I think that's a big part of it. I think, constantly finding new folks to talk to, refining your like kind of sales pitch, elevator pitch, like all that sort of stuff. So I think one, having that connect like direct conversation with your existing pilot initial customers, and then always having a steady stream of new folks that you're talking to. I think you need a mix of those two because, I mean, especially in crypto, the landscape's always changing in terms of what people are prioritizing, what's at the top of their mind, like whether it's, the price, the token price is going up, adding more investor interest, like FTX collapsing, causing a lot of people to go into a state of fear, et cetera. So I think, just keeping that pulse on everything is super important.
The question I asked you earlier, you said you knew you wanted to be a startup founder. And I read it, you were not just a software engineer, but according to your LinkedIn, you were also a PM. Did you intentionally make that move, understanding that one day I would be a founder? Or did that just happen organically? And since you've been both a software engineer and a PM, did those two roles specifically prepare you very well to be a founder? And in what ways did they not prepare you to be a founder?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of questions there. So one, I would say, in terms of like the transition from engineer to PM and then to founder, I'm sure it was part of it. I think the more underlying thing was that for me, I always felt more passionate about building things that other people wanted to use and like solving those problems. And so I actually really did enjoy being an engineer, and I still code and I like to code. But I think I see it more as a means to an end, where I take a lot more pride in like getting a product shipped, getting that feedback from people, and like finding out what works and what doesn't, as opposed to, I think, other engineers feel a lot more passionate about the parts of their work that's like, is this system going to scale? Like, is this well architected? Is it flexible? Like a lot of those things I found myself like just, less passionate about. Not that it's not important, but just from my own perspective. And so I think, one, doing more front-end oriented engineering was more interesting to me. But then especially as a PM, I think you get a lot more influence over those sorts of roadmap and strategy decisions. And so I think that was probably the more key part of why I wanted to switch into more of a product role, because I enjoyed that part of the thinking process. And then in terms of like what prepared me or didn't prepare me to be a founder, I think one, having an engineering background is super useful because you can build those initial versions of the idea yourself, which I think did help me invalidate some of those first ideas like way faster. So I think that's one aspect of it, but definitely I think, it can be hard to build some of these more complex systems all on your own. And especially like I'm not an amazing engineer, so I needed to rely on other people to eventually get the first version of Wally's product going. I think as a PM, one of the skills that was particularly useful was learning how to prioritize like what's important right now, what's not. I think as an engineer, you can get sometimes sucked into the system that you're building. And like I said, sometimes you fall prey to those things of like, oh, I should make this more flexible. I should make it scalable. And it's like, wait, what if nobody uses it? Do you want to waste time on that? Like, let's prove that the first 10 people want it before we scale to support like hundreds or thousands or like, depending on what type of product, like hopefully hundreds of thousands. Probably not in our case, but then the other thing too was actually just coordinating a team to work on things together. I think as an IC engineer, you're not as involved in that process. And I think a lot of that work can feel tedious and not that fun. But as a PM, it's like it is a critical part of your job. So you learn how to do it. And so I think that's important. Like as a team starts to get even more than like 2 or 3, 4 people, you do need to have folks like not working over each other or communicating and sometimes in a startup, actually probably oftentimes in startups, that first version of the product is built with contractors and maybe not full-time team members. And so that was another thing. Specifically at Reddit, we had kind of, some folks were overseas, some folks were in the US, sitting in the office with us. And so even coordinating those sorts of folks' work streams where it does take a little bit more delegation, thoughtfulness, stuff like that can be helpful.
With the changing crypto landscape, where do you anticipate it would be in 5 years? I feel like Wally solves a definite problem, but there are some other problems in crypto that we still trying to find use cases for them. I guess, apart from your company, where do you see the landscape changing over the next few years? Yeah.
I think definitely this last year has been, an interesting one for crypto. And admittedly, I wasn't part of the industry during the last crypto winter. I was, passively following it just as somebody who pays attention to the tech news and stuff, but it's so different when you're inside the industry. And I think, but just as from a product perspective, my thought is that I think what's going to happen with crypto is that for it to survive or like succeed, it really needs to find its place more as like an infrastructure technology rather than trying to be so in the face of all the consumers. And so I think that means as it applies to like cryptocurrencies and financial applications and stuff, it'll be potentially the rails that certain things operate on. Like maybe it's about sending money internationally. You know, I think that's always an obvious example that crypto actually does better than probably the existing financial system. And other things about like bank to bank communication and stable coins. I think all those things are really interesting and will just be like me as a person, I don't necessarily have to think that I'm sending this money through, like I have to buy Bitcoin and then send the Bitcoin and my friend has to transfer it. Like potentially it'll just be like, hey, I'm going to send this money to my friend. And then I don't know, whether it's Venmo or whatever, converts it to crypto, sends it internationally. Then the bank on the other side can reconvert it into the local currency, like things like that, I think. And the end consumer doesn't need to know or care that it's crypto. So I think that's from more of the financial applications. I think from the perspective of NFTs, I think I see a world where there are like lots of digital collectibles, digital things in all these games. But I think the biggest change is that I don't think all these things need to be things that are held for speculative value, that they're even purchased for resale value or anything like that. I think they can be free things that you earn that are part of loyalty programs, games as you reach certain levels. And maybe you can trade and transfer them. And maybe they do give you certain, perks or whatever across a landscape. So I think that interoperability is like a big part of NFTs, but I just don't see the majority of NFTs like ever being resold for any like meaningful sum of money. And so I think then that also applies in the same way where you may be part of a loyalty program or a game or something and you start earning these things, but you don't have to care that they're crypto unless it's super relevant to you to move them outside of that ecosystem. So I think that's the big thing for me is like, how does crypto move back a step into a layer where real products are being built and it just is the right technological choice for the infrastructure of it.
6 years ago, you were working at your first company, Viome, and you'd even look at yourself 6 years in the future. What would you tell yourself starting off at your first company? You didn't know anything. So your first time being in tech. What advice would you have for that person? And what do you think 6 years older advice would have for you for today?
I think there's a couple of things. One is that I always wanted to start a company and I'd always been tinkering around with stuff. Like I had tried to start things in college, even after I left Viome, before I joined Reddit, I was thinking, should I pursue something? And I'm actually sort of glad that I didn't. I think I learned so much in those years in between. One, at Viome, I think working at a really small startup is, I think, a really critical experience. I learned a ton. It definitely helped me accelerate my career and stuff like that and see what are those early stages of a company like without having all the pressure on myself to make it work. So I think that's super valuable. I think being at Reddit where, it was a smaller company, like about 200, and then I saw it grow through all these different stages. And so I think also just being part of success is an important part. You can see like when things are working, how that feels, and just being able to learn from people that were smarter than me and also build a network of folks that wanted to work with me, respected the work that I did. I think all those things made it easier to eventually start my own company and raise some venture funding, which I also don't think that every company needs to do. So I think those were like the piece of advice that I would potentially give somebody younger is like, even if your goal is to start your company, like you don't have to do it right away. I think having some years of working experience is super valuable. On the flip side, I think probably more people fall on the opposite side of the trap where they think, oh, if I just learn X skill and Y skill, like if I just get one more promotion, then I'll be ready to start my own company. And I would say, don't wait for anything like that either. I don't think it's really about like any sort of like, no VC ever asked me like, oh, are you a senior PM or are you just like a regular PM or whatever, right? Like those promotions don't ever mean anything in that context. It's like, are you meeting the right people? Are you learning from folks? Are you gaining confidence in yourself? Things like that. So I think that's what I would say younger. I mean, to myself in the future, I think there's already so many things that I've learned in the first year or so of doing this in terms of like, how do you work with early customers? How do you work with early team members? How do you recruit team members? How do you, what are things to spend money on? What are things that you waste spending money on? Like just all those things that you learn from having gone through the process. I think you just build those muscles of doing that. So I think I'm hope that, 5 or 6 years from now, whatever I'm doing, that I just taken all those learnings and have become like a better leader or teammate or CEO, whatever, from all those experiences.
In your words, how would you describe what you are building at Wally, and where can people find you? And if somebody wants to work at Wally, what positions are you recruiting for?
The simplest way to explain is that we're working on onboarding infrastructure for crypto companies. And so, like I sort of described at the beginning of the podcast, the initial product is a developer tool that a crypto app would install. So it is a B2B product that sort of takes over their sign-up flow and allows their users to sign up for a crypto wallet with just an email address. And we're also working on some analytics tooling to help companies understand like where in their funnel they are losing those initial customers, where they're coming from, things like that. So that's our initial product. If somebody's like a consumer facing crypto app, then I think we can be a good fit for their product, especially if they're giving away some sort of free NFT. So we work with a lot of loyalty programs, NFT marketplaces, things like that, crypto games. In terms of hiring, we're looking for one more senior engineer. So if anybody's interested in working in the crypto industry and likes the idea of making crypto more accessible to the next wave of users that will join, then we'd love to chat with them. And they can reach us reach me, I guess, at Mayank@wally.xyz, Mayank at Wally, WALLY.xyz.